Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Perplexity, a mystery podcast. As always, I am your host, Kadra. If you're new to the show, hello and welcome. I tell tales every single week that have perplexed me. So if you love a good mystery that leaves you wanting more, don't worry, you're in the right place. And if you end up enjoying today's episode, I would love if you continue to follow along. If you are a returning listener, hello, my friends, welcome back. I'm very happy you're here today. If you are watching on YouTube, you'll see there is not a video today, though I will be putting a lot of pictures in this episode because it is a true crime case and I want you to be able to see the victim and understand the insane lengths of this crime. I am traveling this weekend, so that's why we're not doing video. And some of you may have heard this before because I told this story on the You Should Be Here podcast, which is through Fire Eyes Media. They are friends to the show. Jules runs Fire Eyes Media. You might remember her from my Disappearance of Nicholas Barclay episode. But every season for You Should Be Here, they do a different series. So I was on their Death Not Yet series a while back, where me and several other podcasters shared victim survivor stories. And so today you are going to hear a remastered version of a case that truly haunts me. This is the story of Mary Vincent, and this is also the story of the murder of Roxanne Hayes. So Mary Vincent survived, but Roxanne Hayes did not. So I want to dedicate this episode to Mary Vincent and Roxanne Hayes. I do want to issue a trigger warning for sexual assault and extreme violence. This is a very intense episode, so please take care of yourself while listening. All the sources will be down in the show notes. And then last thing, quickly before we get started, I got several new patrons this week, which is amazing. Thank you guys so much. It really helps the show so much. You guys have no idea. So I wanted to shout out my newest patrons. Welcome to the Perplexed Society, Diana. Welcome to Marilyn, who joined at the highest tier. She is a Perplexed Society Supreme Leader. And my newest Perplexity supporter, who joined at the $2 tier, is Chelsea. Thank you, Chelsea, for joining. So Chelsea's going to get early and ad-free episodes and a little bit of extra stuff like my side story series with guests. Diana is going to get tons of bonus content, and then Marilyn will get all of that plus a t-shirt, and I just sent her a personalized welcome video. So that really helps the show. There's lots of perks and there's a community over there. So if the Perplexed Society interests you, you can always check out patreon.com/Perplexity Mystery Podcast. So without further ado, let's get into the story of Mary Vincent and Roxanne Hayes. Mary Vincent was born in 1963. The middle child of 7 children in Las Vegas. She came from a military family, and her father was a mechanic, her mother a blackjack dealer. Mary also was a great dancer. She dreamed of traveling the world as a competitive dancer, and she had a real gift for the performing arts. At age 13, she performed a solo dance routine at the Miss Universe pageant. But during her teenage years, she struggled. Her parents were going through a very messy divorce, and it also seems from the sources I compiled there was abuse going on in the home. Mary also had a boyfriend at the time that had not been treating her well. So all of these unsafe and tumultuous circumstances left 15-year-old Mary feeling very lost. She ran away from her Las Vegas home. At this point, it's September 1978. Mary Vincent had been hitchhiking to get away from everything. After being on her own for a while, living on the streets, sleeping behind trash cans or in unlocked cars, she was trying to get home and was in Modesto. She held up a sign for hitchhiking, said she was going south. Hitchhiking was incredibly common and perfectly normal during this time period. In fact, there were a couple other hitchhikers standing right behind Mary, headed in the same general direction she was.
a blue van would pull up in front of Mary and the other hitchhikers. The driver was a man in his 50s, Lawrence Singleton, though he didn't give his name. When Singleton pulled up, he said he only had room for Mary, this young girl. But the back of the van was completely open, so the other two hitchhikers warned Mary not to go. But Mary was exhausted. She was so eager to get home. She knew she couldn't take one more day out there on her own. She would later say that she didn't think about what type of person this guy was or the situation. All she knew was she was exhausted. Singleton was also a pot-bellied, balding grandfather. What was he going to do? So, 15-year-old Mary climbed into Singleton's van. Singleton filled 2-gallon milk jugs with alcohol before hitting the road, drinking from them as he drove. He also made several passes at Mary before she moved out of his reach. She told Singleton that she was headed home to Vegas. He explained he was going to Reno, but he would take her to Vegas, which directionally doesn't make sense. But Mary was exhausted and desperate. She fell asleep. After a while, she woke up, and it was dark outside. She's looking around, trying to get a sense of where they are, and she's reading the road signs. This is when Mary knew something was wrong. She immediately started to panic, realizing Singleton had taken Mary east and not south. They were in Central Valley, California, which is an area with very vast and open farmland. There are not many people around. And this is obviously not the direction of home. So Mary became angry and scared. She felt around her seat, looking for something, and found a long pointed object that turned out to be a random stick. But this is all she had. So she held it in front of Singleton and confronted him, demanding he turn around. "What are you doing?" she said. "We're going the wrong way. You have to turn back." Singleton apologized, saying it was an honest mistake. He was just an innocent old man. He meant no harm. So he insisted he would turn the van around. So he pulled over, stopped the van, and he claimed that first he needed to relieve himself. So he got out to pee, and again, at this point, it's nighttime. Mary can't really see much. They're in the middle of the Central Valley of California. So she's worried. She's trying to figure out how she could outrun this man at night with there being minimal visibility outside. And she glances down and sees that one of her shoes is untied. And so she's thinking, if I have to outrun this guy, I need to make sure my shoes are tied. So she gets out of the car, she bends over to tie her tennis shoe, then everything went black. Singleton had struck Mary in the head with a sledgehammer, knocking her unconscious. So who was Singleton? Lawrence Larry Singleton was born in July 1927 in Tampa, Florida. He worked as a merchant seaman and was married twice, with a daughter named Deborah from his first marriage. Singleton was a very heavy drinker and he had priors. He had been convicted for contributing to the delinquency of a minor, and by the late 70s, he was estranged from his daughter. He also had a reputation for having a bad temper and problems with women. So Mary is trapped in Singleton's van. She wakes up in the back, tied up and naked. Singleton then repeatedly raped her throughout the night. Mary asked why was he doing this, and there was no response. She repeatedly begged Singleton to set her free, promising she wouldn't tell anyone. Singleton was so drunk that eventually he fell asleep. but she couldn't escape. She was tied up. The next thing Mary knew, it was daylight. She continued to beg Singleton, "Please, let me go. Set me free. I won't say anything." In an unimaginable act of cruelty, Singleton then dragged Mary Vincent from the van, naked and bleeding, saying, quote, "You want to be set free? I'll set you free." Then he opened his toolbox and brandished a hatchet. Singleton hacked off Mary's left forearm below the elbow. She then grabbed him really tight with her right arm in complete shock. Of course, she's bleeding, she's screaming, and the next thing Mary knew, she was falling backwards. But she had grabbed on to Singleton with her right arm so tight, she didn't understand why she was falling. But she fell to the ground, and she looks up, and she sees that Singleton is flicking something off of him. And she realized it was her right arm. Singleton had severed both of her arms below the elbow, and her right arm was still clutching onto him. Then, because of shock and blood loss, Mary Vincent passed out. Singleton then dragged her to the nearby railing and threw her down a 30-foot cliff, believing she was dead. Then he drove off. During this fall, Mary Vincent broke 4 ribs, but driven by a will to survive and a sense of responsibility to prevent Larry Singleton from harming anyone else, Mary awoke. So much of her wanted to sleep, but Mary heard a voice in her head telling her she couldn't go to sleep. If she went to sleep, he would do this to someone else. Mary would later say in an episode of I Survived, quote, "I couldn't let him do this to another girl." So she looks at the mud on the ground and she packs the stumps of her bleeding arms to slow the bleeding. After packing her stumps with mud, she climbed back up the 30-foot cliff with no arms. And this, of course, was absolutely exhausting. It took her all day. She then walked along Interstate 5 in total darkness. She said the only light that she had was the light of the moon. She also listened to the faraway sounds of the freeway, and she just kept thinking, if I get closer and closer to this sound, then I'll find civilization. Mary was naked, covered in blood. I can't imagine what was going through her mind. After walking for a while, a memory came to her of cutting her finger as a child and her mother telling her to hold her finger above her heart to stop the bleeding. Mary Vincent then held her severed arms upright to keep from bleeding out. She walked for 3 miles. Then the first car came. 2 men in a convertible. But they sped away in total shock of her appearance, despite her cries for help. In Mary's own words, she, quote, "looked like something out of a Fright Night movie." Mary feared that she would die out there because the few passerbys would be too afraid to stop and help her. But eventually, a couple on their honeymoon stopped, saving her life. They had just so happened to have gotten lost and taken the wrong exit. They got her in the back of their old truck, and they sped as fast as they could to the nearest payphone. Mary was airlifted from the payphone to the nearest hospital. Mary Vincent had lost over half the blood in her body, and the remaining blood had gone to a toxic level. While recovering in the hospital, Mary worked with police to create a composite sketch. She refused to rest until it was finished. Her efforts led to Singleton's arrest and conviction very quickly. Singleton's neighbor saw the composite sketch on the news recognized it immediately as Singleton and called police. This neighbor was actually friends with Larry Singleton, but this sketch was described so incredibly accurately, down to every last detail, by Mary. So as soon as this neighbor saw it, she had no doubt that that was Singleton. He was arrested just 9 days after the crime. Singleton would later tell police that the reason he had severed Mary's arms was in hopes to conceal her identity, because then she wouldn't have fingerprints. I guess he didn't account for dental records. He also claimed that Mary was, quote, a $10 whore. He didn't attack her, his friend did, and that there were 2 other sex workers in the car. He was passed out drunk. Larry Singleton's trial took place in early 1979, and Mary Vincent bravely testified against him, looking him in the eyes, identifying him as her attacker, all while wearing her new prosthetic arms. She sat just 10 feet from him. When she finished her riveting testimony, she had to leave the courtroom, passing right by Singleton, just inches away. When Mary left, Singleton chillingly whispered, quote, "If it's the last thing I'll do, I'll finish the job." Mary Vincent was so frightened she ran out of the courtroom. Vincent later won a civil judgment against Singleton and was awarded $2.56 million. But she did not ever receive this payment because of Singleton's unemployment and inability to pay. He had just $200 in his savings. In March of 1979, Singleton was convicted of attempted kidnapping, murder, rape, sodomy, and forced oral copulation. He received the maximum sentence allowed at the time in California: 14 years in prison. That's it. The judge would later say if he had the power, he would send Larry Singleton to prison for the rest of his natural life. It's so horrifying to think that during this time period, someone could commit such a brutal, horrific crime to a 15-year-old girl and spend less time in prison than how old the victim was. But this was a time period where rape and sexual assault crimes were not taken seriously. Additionally, due to quote-unquote good behavior, Larry Singleton was released after serving only 8 years in prison. His early release caused public outrage. And that's one of the things that I love about this story. It's a horrible story, but it's also an amazing story because the legal system did not protect Mary in this case, but the public did everything they could to fight it. Everyone was talking about how absolutely insane this was, that Larry Singleton was getting out of prison. He was widely shunned, and he could not settle in several California communities because there were so many protests. In 1983, a work incentive law was passed to decrease overcrowding in prisons. This law allowed prison sentences to be commuted for prisoners that were working in the jail. Because of this public outrage, they tried to parole Singleton to a different area in California, and the mayor of that town refused to allow that. They then tried to parole him in Tampa, Florida, releasing him to live with some relatives because that's where he was from originally. But the people in Florida also had a public outcry. Nobody wanted Singleton anywhere near them. The Tampa chapter of the Guardian Angels, which was a vigilante group at the time, also led protests, and Florida officials rejected Singleton from being paroled there. So then the legal team's like, well, what are we going to do with him? So they tried to get him back to California, and officials put out a restraining order against Singleton. He was eventually taken to Redwood City in secret. But reporters found out, and protesters flooded Larry Singleton's hotel. Things like this continued to happen in multiple other places. He was eventually taken to Rodeo, California, and a mob of hundreds of people showed up to protest. He was then escorted out of town by the sheriff's department in a bulletproof vest. So eventually, after all of these moves back and forth, all of these protests and refusals and restraining orders, the governor of California put Larry Singleton in a trailer in San Quentin and was like, look, he's not going anywhere near the public. He can stay in this trailer until his parole is done, and then we can figure out what we're doing with this guy. He was then taken to Florida after his parole. Someone even tried to kill Larry Singleton with a bomb that detonated near the house that he was staying at, but no one was injured. Meanwhile, during the last several decades, Mary Vincent had risen, like a phoenix from the ashes. She adapted to life without her arms. She learned to use her prosthetics within 2 weeks, and she eventually customized them herself, using spare parts from broken down electronics. She even created a custom prosthetic piece to help her hold a bowling ball when she went bowling. She went to art school in the Pacific Northwest. She became an incredible artist, working with chalk pastels, and focused on creating powerful images of women. She became a feminist icon. But Mary's journey was not an easy one. Early on in her recovery, surgeons had to take part of her leg in order to save her right arm, and this ended her career as a dancer. In her return to Las Vegas, she also became a public spectacle. She enrolled back in school for the handicapped, and her old friends started to draw away from her. Even after the trial, media outlets wouldn't leave Mary alone. Her already strained relationship with her parents got worse and worse. As she'd say later in her life, quote, "They were more interested in what they felt about what happened to me than what I felt," end quote. So ultimately, Mary's family fractured in the aftermath of this attack. Her father started collecting guns, plotting ways to kill Larry Singleton. And loud fights became a regular facet in Mary's home that she was originally so desperate to go back to. She struggled with nightmares, anxiety, depression, insomnia, and PTSD, especially after Singleton's release from prison, remembering the words he said to her in that courtroom, that he would finish her off if it was the last thing he did. So Mary left, traveling, and eventually found a small town in Washington to settle down. There, she got married. She became a mother, something that she had dreamed of doing since she was 4 years old. She began to move frequently. She was too afraid to stay in one place for long. What if Singleton found her? What if he hurt her and her 2 sons? Within the looming threat of another attack and the imposing, hounding force of the media, Mary's marriage fell apart. Her income became limited to disability checks, insufficient or never paid court settlements, and that of her boyfriends. When one home was repossessed within months of her overborrowing on a down payment, she and the boys, which she referred to as her little men, lived in an unheated, abandoned Arco station in the icy months of winter. With her children, Mary felt the push to keep fighting, to keep going, even in the moments that she didn't want to. As a result of his very lenient sentencing, California's Singleton Bill was passed in 1987. Supported by Mary Vincent and other well-known survivors, this law carries a 25-year minimum for perpetrators who commit a crime involving torture. But that bill became law after Singleton's sentence ended and could not be applied to him. In 1997, a neighbor called police after seeing Singleton attack another woman in his home in Sulphur Springs, Florida. While Mary Vincent survived this monster, other innocent women would not be so lucky. Police would find the body of 31-year-old Roxanne Hayes, a mother of 3 and a sex worker in Tampa, Florida. She had been stabbed 12 times. Roxanne also had a boyfriend who loved her very much and referred to her in the media as a very generous woman, a loving mother with a wild kind of laugh. He even said that she once climbed into a dumpster to save a stray kitten. At the trial for the murder of Roxanne Hayes, Mary Vincent would once again take the stand, raising her right prosthetic hand before the courtroom. For 10 minutes, the entire courtroom was silent, while Singleton sat emotionless, and Mary Vincent retold her story, looking him in the eye, physically pointing to him, and identifying him as the man who attacked her all those years ago. This time, when she walked out of the courtroom, he said nothing. The jury deliberated for 1 hour, and Singleton was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to death. He was placed on death row, but died of cancer in the prison hospital in 2001. Mary would later say she was unsatisfied with his death, saying, quote, "I wanted to understand what was in that dark soul of his. I felt that I was robbed of that opportunity," end quote. Because of her 2 children and seeing how relieved they were, this gave her closure because she knew that they were safe. So she was ultimately able to come to terms with how Singleton passed. Mary Vincent also later got remarried, becoming Mary McGriff. Art was also a lifeline for her. Mary estimates that she has produced over 4,000 pieces of art since losing her arms, and she has since sold or donated nearly all of them. And though she no longer pursues this craft today, Mary McGriff says she doesn't need it anymore to be happy. She said in 2023, quote, "I'm just happy with life. There's so much more out there. It's beautiful. It's not a matter of looking for it or making it happen. You should just accept happiness when it comes to you," end quote. There are so many beautiful things about this woman, but what is most amazing to me is how she used her life to help other victims. Something that I see time and time again as a podcaster who does stories like this is how inspiring it is when people go through something so awful, they take this tragedy and they see it as a second chance in life, and they give back to other people so that they, 1, never have to go through this, or 2, they have resources and support that they themselves may not have had. So Mary became a prominent victim advocate. She founded the Mary Vincent Foundation to help victims of traumatic crimes. She also delivered motivational speeches. Fiona Davis from Open Ceilings magazine wrote an article about Mary in 2021, and I would like to end this episode with a quote from Fiona Davis because I really like how she sums all of this up. Quote, "But Mary Vincent cannot be fully encompassed in any conclusion. In the latest accounts of her life, she was still reliant on disability checks and couldn't afford to replace the arms she had outgrown. But she reveled in her ability to use bits and pieces from broken radios and refrigerators to make them function the way she needed. She felt safe to share her new location in Gig Harbor, Washington, but wouldn't give motivational speeches to high school students after being mocked on too many occasions. She had become an aspiring artist who loved to draw family portraits and feminine warriors, but still spoke often to nightmares that will likely never go away. Her shoulders ached every day as she held her prosthetics up to walk her dogs, play pool, or embrace her sons. A pattern is etched in the narratives that fail to adequately portray the truth. A paradigm that maybe exemplifies an inherent human instinct to pick and choose elements of fact or a particular life as a story is woven around or a desired tone, effect, or moral, to be a victor or a victim, to be a tragic or happy ending. There is comfort in the simplistic, the essential, the linear. But if any conclusion can be drawn from Mary's story, it isn't that life is comfortable or clear or chosen. It's complicated. It's felt. Before anything else, it is lived. End quote. And I certainly think if there's any example of somebody who has fully lived a life, it is this woman. And that is the incredible, horrific, unimaginable survival story of Mary Vincent.
Perplexity, a Mystery Podcast is hosted, written, and produced by me, Kadra Brannon. This show is proud to be a part of the Black Cat Network. Assistant editor is Charlie Leopold. Assistant producer is TJ McRae. Theme song by Patrick Thompson. Music for this episode is from Pixabay. If you enjoyed today's episode, leave a 5-star review wherever you get your podcasts. If you have a story to share or a topic request, email perplexitymysterypodcast@gmail.com. Contact, support, and merch links can be found in the episode description. And you can always unlock early and ad-free episodes and exclusive bonus content by joining the Perplexed Society at patreon.com/perplexitymysterypodcast. Until next week, stay curious.